I didn't lose my life all at once. I handed it over, piece by piece, until there was nothing left to recognize. For a long time, I believed that letting others decide was the same as being loved. If people needed me, approved of me, depended on me, then I must have been doing something right. That belief shaped every choice I made, long before I understood what it was costing me. I learned early how to be agreeable. How to listen carefully and respond correctly. How to read a room and become whatever version of myself would cause the least friction. I was praised for it. Rewarded. Trusted. No one warned me that approval can become a trap. At first, it felt natural. Parents have expectations. Teachers have plans. Society has a path already mapped out for you. I didn't resist it, I stepped into it willingly, telling myself that clarity was a gift. What I didn't see was how quickly clarity turns into confinement. Every major decision in my life felt pre-approved. The direction I took, the roles I accepted, the future I prepared for, all of it made sense to everyone around me. And because it made sense to them, I assumed it should make sense to me too. When doubts appeared, I dismissed them. Doubt felt like ingratitude. Like weakness. Like a flaw I needed to correct. So I corrected myself instead. I told myself I didn't need more. I told myself I was lucky. I told myself everyone compromises. Those sentences became a shield. I used them whenever something inside me resisted the life I was building. Years passed quietly. I became reliable. Predictable. Safe. People trusted me with responsibility, with expectations, with their plans. I carried them carefully, afraid of dropping anything. The strange thing is, the more I carried for others, the less I carried for myself. I stopped asking what I wanted because the answer never seemed practical. Desire felt messy. Unreasonable. Too risky to take seriously. It was easier to align myself with decisions already made than to introduce uncertainty. So when choices appeared, I waited for guidance. What do you think I should do? What would be best? What makes sense? People answered confidently. They always do. And I followed those answers, mistaking certainty for wisdom. That's how my life slowly stopped belonging to me. There were moments, brief, unsettling moments, when I felt something was wrong. A heaviness in my chest during celebrations. A strange distance during achievements that were supposed to matter. I would stand in rooms filled with people who cared about me and feel oddly absent. I told myself I was just tired. Or ungrateful. Or overthinking. The truth was simpler and more uncomfortable. I was living a life designed by consensus, not conviction. The first time I noticed how deep it went was during a conversation that should have been ordinary. Someone asked me a direct question, not about my plans, not about my responsibilities, but about me. What do you want? The question caught me off guard. My mind went blank. Not because I didn't want anything, but because I had never practiced answering that question honestly. I laughed it off. Changed the subject. Gave a vague response that sounded reasonable. But the discomfort lingered. That night, I realized I couldn't remember the last decision I had made without consulting someone else first. Not because I lacked intelligence, but because I lacked permission. I had trained myself to seek approval before trusting my own instincts. That realization unsettled me more than any failure ever had. I began to see patterns everywhere. How often I adapted instead of choosing. How frequently I delayed decisions until someone else stepped in. How easily I surrendered responsibility for my own direction. I wasn't being controlled. I was cooperating. And cooperation, when unexamined, becomes surrender. The worst part wasn't that others had influence over my life. Influence is normal. The worst part was that I had stopped questioning it. I had allowed convenience, harmony, and fear of disappointment to shape my entire existence. I stayed in situations that felt wrong because they felt familiar. I accepted futures that didn't excite me because they reassured everyone else. I silenced discomfort because speaking it would complicate things. Over time, that silence grew louder. I started waking up with a dull sense of unease, not panic, not sadness, just the quiet knowledge that I was drifting further away from myself. Days blurred together. Milestones passed without joy. My life felt like something I was maintaining rather than inhabiting. And still, I didn't stop. Because stopping would have required me to admit something frightening, that I had allowed my life to be decided for me, and that no one was going to give it back unless I took responsibility for it myself. The moment of clarity didn't arrive as a breakdown. It arrived as a thought so simple it was devastating. If I continue like this, one day I will wake up and realize there is nothing left to change. That thought stayed with me. Followed me through routines I had perfected. Through conversations I could perform effortlessly. Through a life that looked complete but felt hollow. For the first time, I understood that the danger wasn't making the wrong choice. It was never making one at all. And once that understanding took hold, I couldn't return to ignorance. The life I had been living, the one everyone else seemed so confident about, suddenly felt fragile, like a structure held together by habits and expectations rather than truth. I didn't know yet how to reclaim myself. I only knew that if I kept letting others decide, one day there would be no me left to reclaim. And that fear, quiet, steady, undeniable, was the first thing that finally felt like my own. Once that fear took root, everything changed. Not outwardly. My life continued to function exactly as it always had. I showed up. I answered messages. I fulfilled obligations. From the outside, nothing was different. Inside, I was unraveling. Every decision, even the smallest ones, began to feel heavy. What to say? How to respond? Whether to agree or hesitate? I started noticing how often my first instinct was to check how others might react before allowing myself to feel anything at all. That realization was exhausting. I wasn't living my life. I was managing reactions. I began replaying old moments in my mind, not as memories, but as evidence. Times when I had swallowed disagreement to keep the peace. Times when I had chosen the expected path instead of the honest one. Times when I had waited for approval that never truly arrived, only continued expectations. The more I looked, the clearer it became, I had outsourced my identity. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. I became restless. Irritable. Not outwardly angry, just quietly tense. Small requests felt overwhelming. Simple questions triggered a disproportionate sense of pressure, as if every answer I gave would lock me deeper into a version of myself I no longer trusted. At night, my thoughts spiraled. I asked myself questions I had avoided for years. Who would I be if no one needed me to be reliable? Who would I be if I disappointed everyone at once? Who would I be if I finally chose myself? Those questions terrified me because I didn't know the answers. I had spent so long adapting that I didn't know where adaptation ended and I began. I didn't know which parts of me were genuine and which were survival strategies. That uncertainty hurt more than dissatisfaction ever had. I started noticing a dangerous thought creeping in, the idea that disappearing might be easier than changing. Not dying. Just leaving. Starting over somewhere no one had expectations of me. Somewhere I wouldn't have to explain why I was suddenly different. The thought scared me because it felt comforting. When escape feels comforting, it means staying has become unbearable. I tried to fix things quietly, the way I always did. I read. I reflected. I told myself that awareness was progress. That understanding the problem was halfway to solving it. But awareness without action only sharpens the pain. I felt trapped between two fears, the fear of staying invisible, and the fear of becoming visible too late. The breaking point came unexpectedly, during a conversation that should have been harmless. Someone spoke confidently about a decision they had made, one that disrupted their life, disappointed others, and still felt right to them. They didn't sound reckless. They sounded grounded. I felt something inside me crack. Not envy. Recognition. I realized then that I had mistaken harmony for integrity. I had believed that avoiding conflict meant being good, when all it really meant was avoiding responsibility for my own direction. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because my mind was racing, but because it was finally still enough for the truth to surface. No one had forced this life on me. I stopped choosing, and called it maturity. That truth was brutal. Because if no one had taken my life from me, then I was the one who had given it away. I felt panic rise, sharp and physical, as if I were suddenly aware of how late it was. Not late in the day. Late in my life. Late to decisions I should have made years ago. I considered drastic change. Quitting. Leaving. Cutting ties without explanation. Burning everything down just to feel movement again. But something stopped me. I realized that running would only repeat the same pattern, letting circumstances decide for me again, instead of taking responsibility. Escape would give me relief, but not agency. What I needed wasn't disappearance. It was ownership. That realization didn't calm me. It terrified me. Ownership meant disappointing people. It meant being misunderstood. It meant choosing without consensus and living with the consequences. For someone who had lived on approval, that felt unbearable. And yet, staying felt worse. I began to test my voice in small ways. Saying no when I meant no. Pausing instead of agreeing immediately. Expressing uncertainty instead of hiding it behind compliance. Each time, my heart raced. I expected backlash. Anger. Rejection. Most of the time, none came. That confused me. I realized how much of my fear had been imagined, reinforced by years of self-silencing rather than actual consequences. I had built a prison out of assumptions and called it responsibility. Still, the damage of waiting was real. I felt grief for the years I had lived as a version of myself that was easier for others to accept. I felt anger at myself for not resisting sooner. I felt sadness for the person I might have been if I had trusted my instincts earlier. That grief didn't push me forward. It anchored me. I understood then that reclaiming my life wouldn't be a single bold move. It would be a series of uncomfortable decisions made without reassurance. A slow rebuilding of trust with myself. And that meant one thing above all: I could no longer let others decide who I was becoming. Not out of rebellion. Out of responsibility. The moment I accepted that, the fantasy of being guided lost its comfort. Guidance without consent is just surrender in disguise. I didn't have a clear plan yet. I didn't know exactly what I wanted. But for the first time, I understood what I couldn't continue doing. I couldn't keep living a life shaped by everyone else's certainty while my own voice remained untested. That realization didn't feel empowering. It felt final. Because once you accept that your life is yours to decide, there's no one left to blame for what comes next. Taking my life back didn't feel heroic. It felt lonely. The moment I stopped asking for permission, the noise around me changed. Not louder, clearer. I began to notice how often people had spoken for me simply because I had allowed them to. How comfortable they were with the version of me that required nothing from them except approval. When I started choosing differently, some of that comfort disappeared. And so did some people. That was the first real cost of ownership. I didn't announce anything. I didn't explain myself in long speeches. I just stopped agreeing when I didn't mean it. I stopped shaping my answers to be received well. I let my uncertainty exist without trying to smooth it out. It was uncomfortable, for everyone. Some people reacted with confusion. Others with disappointment. A few with quiet resistance, as if my independence were a personal betrayal. I learned quickly that when you stop being predictable, people project motives onto you to restore their sense of control. I was called selfish. Difficult. Changed. They weren't wrong. I had changed. But what they didn't see was how much effort it took just to say a simple no. How much fear sat behind every honest sentence. How many nights I lay awake wondering whether I had waited too long to become myself without burning everything down. There were moments when I doubted everything. When the old instinct to defer, to adapt, to disappear quietly tried to pull me back. It would have been so easy to retreat into the familiar version of myself, the one who made life easier for everyone else. But I knew what that life led to. I had lived it. Reclaiming my voice didn't bring clarity overnight. It brought friction. Mistakes. Decisions that didn't land the way I hoped. I disappointed people I cared about. I misunderstood myself more than once. But something fundamental had shifted. For the first time, my life felt authored. Not perfect. Not impressive. But intentional. I began to notice a new kind of tiredness, not the draining exhaustion of suppression, but the honest fatigue that comes from effort aligned with truth. That tiredness felt earned. Clean. Regret still followed me. Especially when I thought about how long it took to get here. About the years I spent living as a reflection of other people's certainty. About the choices I never tested because I assumed they would be wrong. Some losses couldn't be undone. Some paths had closed quietly while I was waiting for approval to walk them. I had to accept that without bargaining. Acceptance, I learned, isn't agreement. It's responsibility without resentment. The hardest thing wasn't starting late. It was forgiving myself for not starting sooner. I had to grieve the person I might have been, not with bitterness, but with honesty. That grief didn't weaken me. It grounded me. It reminded me that time is not neutral, and silence is not harmless. I stopped romanticizing sacrifice. I stopped calling self-erasure maturity. I stopped confusing being needed with being alive. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, something else emerged. Trust. Not in outcomes. Not in certainty. But in my ability to choose and survive the consequences. That trust was fragile at first. I protected it fiercely. Every time I honored my instinct instead of overriding it, it grew stronger. Every time I stayed present in discomfort instead of escaping into compliance, it rooted itself deeper. I no longer waited for consensus before acting. I listened to advice, but I no longer surrendered responsibility. Guidance became input, not direction. That difference changed everything. If there is a dark secret at the center of this confession, it's this: no one took my life from me. I gave it away because it felt safer than owning it. And safety, I learned too late, is not the same as meaning. Meaning requires risk. Voice. Presence. I don't know what my life will look like years from now. I no longer pretend to. What I know is that it will be mine, shaped by choices I make consciously, not by expectations I inherit quietly. If someone listening to this feels the familiar weight of other people's certainty pressing down on their own uncertainty, listen carefully. That pressure doesn't disappear with time. It solidifies. You don't lose yourself in a single moment of weakness. You lose yourself slowly, every time you let someone else decide what's best for you while you stay silent. I let them decide my life. And I almost woke up with nothing left to choose. Now, even when I'm afraid, even when I'm unsure, I choose anyway. Because the cost of choosing wrong is survivable. The cost of never choosing at all is permanent. And I refuse to disappear quietly again.